Sunlight, weak and diluted by the city smog, filtered through the sheer curtains of Cece's apartment, painting the living room in a hazy, ethereal glow. Dust motes danced in the beams, illuminating the worn patches on the floral sofa and the chipped ceramic cat perched precariously on the television stand. Lucy traced the rim of her teacup, the lukewarm liquid mirroring the tepid unease churning in her stomach. Across from her, Cece, her older sister, flitted about the room, gathering stray clothes and humming a tuneless melody. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a familiar static charge that always preceded difficult conversations. "So, about this blind date," Cece's voice, usually bright and bubbly, held a hesitant tremor. She perched on the edge of the sofa, her gaze flitting nervously around the room, avoiding Lucy's eyes. Lucy swallowed, the tea catching in her throat. The very words, blind date, conjured images of awkward silences, forced smiles, and the crushing weight of societal expectations. A blind date. The thought echoed in her mind, hollow and unsettling. Why did the prospect fill her with such a peculiar mix of dread and was it hope? A flicker of something akin to longing surprised her. The longing wasn't for romance, not precisely. It was a longing for escape. "Cece, Brother Jiang is a nice guy," Cece finally managed, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's a doctor, stable job, owns his own apartment." The litany of virtues, meant to be persuasive, only amplified Lucy's discomfort. Nice, stable, apartment. These words felt like bars on a cage, not keys to freedom. Lucy knew her sister meant well, but her well-meaning intentions often felt suffocating, like being wrapped in a too tight embrace. "I know," Lucy replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Cece, bless her heart, couldn't understand. She couldn't grasp the suffocating weight of their brother-in-law's presence, the constant veiled threats, the leering glances that made her skin crawl. Che Nan, her sister's husband, was a viper disguised in a tailored suit. His kindness was a carefully constructed facade, a thin veneer over a core of malice. Lucy longed to scream, to tear down the pretense, but fear, a cold, paralyzing fear, held her captive. "When you go on a blind date, take the initiative," Cece continued, her voice regaining some of its usual chirpiness. "Men like women who are proactive, you know. Show him you're interested, ask him questions, laugh at his jokes, even if they're not funny." She punctuated her advice with a playful nudge, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath Lucy's composed exterior. Lucy forced a weak smile. Proactive? The very thought felt alien. Her life had been a series of reactions, of dodging blows and shrinking from shadows. Proactive implied agency, a control she hadn't felt in years. Laugh at his jokes, even if they're not funny. The advice rang hollow, a cruel parody of genuine connection. Could she really bring herself to perform this charade, to pretend to be someone she wasn't, just to appease a stranger? "As long as you have a boyfriend, you can move out of our house," Cece said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Avoid your brother-in-law's attention." The unspoken word hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the unspoken threat that permeated their lives. Cece's gaze finally met Lucy's, a flicker of fear and helplessness in her eyes. It was a silent plea, a desperate cry for help masked as sisterly advice. Lucy's heart ached for her sister. Cece, trapped in her own gilded cage, was as much a victim as Lucy herself. Che Nan's manipulation extended beyond Lucy, weaving a web of control around their entire family. Cece's constant attempts to set Lucy up on dates weren't just acts of sisterly concern, they were desperate attempts to find a lifeline, a way out for both of them. A sudden thought struck Lucy, a spark of defiance igniting in the ashes of her resignation. "Cece," she began, a new resolve hardening her voice, what if we did something a little different? Cece's brow furrowed, a mixture of confusion and apprehension clouding her features. Different? What do you mean? Lucy leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. What if it wasn't just me on the blind date? She paused, gauging her sister's reaction. What if it was a three-person blind date? A slow smile spread across Cece's face, the hesitant apprehension replaced by a glimmer of understanding. A three-person blind date, she echoed, her voice laced with intrigue. With you, me, and a friend, Lucy finished, her gaze fixed on the chipped ceramic cat, a strange sense of anticipation bubbling within her. A friend who can help us see through the charade. A friend who can help us find a real way out. The apartment, bathed in the hazy afternoon light, suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a staging ground. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams seemed to shimmer with a newfound energy, a promise of change hanging heavy in the air. The game, it seemed, was about to begin. The aroma of roasted coffee beans hung heavy in the air, a comforting blanket against the chill of the late autumn afternoon. Lucy nervously smoothed the wrinkles from her worn skirt, the cheap fabric a stark contrast to the plush velvet seating of the upscale coffee shop. Her fingers traced the rim of the chipped porcelain cup, the warmth barely penetrating the icy grip of anxiety that clenched her stomach. Why had Zhuang Yi insisted on this meeting? A blind date? The very idea felt archaic, a relic from a bygone era. A quick escape from her current predicament, maybe. Living under the same roof as Che Nan had become unbearable, his constant criticisms and veiled threats chipping away at her self-worth like a persistent drizzle on sandstone. He treated her and Cece like pawns in some twisted game, their financial dependence his weapon of choice. She glanced at her watch, the ticking seconds amplifying her unease. He was late. Typical. Maybe this whole thing was a waste of time. Just another disappointment in a string of disappointments that seemed to define her life. Just as she was about to gather her things and leave, a figure materialized in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the soft glow of the afternoon sun. He was tall, imposing, his presence filling the space with a quiet authority. His dark suit, impeccably tailored, screamed wealth and power, a world away from her own threadbare existence. He scanned the room, his gaze sharp and discerning, before finally landing on her. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features, a subtle tightening of his lips, a barely perceptible furrow in his brow. "Hello, are you introduced by Zhuang Yi?" His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and controlled, devoid of any warmth. Lucy's throat tightened. He radiated an aura of coldness, an aloofness that sent a shiver down her spine. This was not how she envisioned her afternoon. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, for someone kind, someone understanding. Someone who wouldn't judge her worn-out shoes or the slight tremor in her voice. Yes, she managed, the word barely a whisper against the background murmur of the coffee shop. "Can I sit down, please?" It wasn't a question, more of a statement. He settled into the plush armchair opposite her with an air of detached politeness, his movements precise and economical. Lucy nodded, her mind racing. What was this all about? Zhuang Yi had been vague, mentioning only a promising opportunity. An opportunity for what? Certainly not this. This man exuded an air of icy detachment, a stark contrast to the warmth and humor she craved. He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense and unsettling. "We can get the certificate now." His words were abrupt, clipped, devoid of any preamble. Lucy stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Certificate? What certificate? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "I'm sorry," she stammered, "I don't understand." The scent of vanilla latte suddenly turned cloying, suffocating. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, the world tilting precariously on its axis. "Mary," he clarified, his tone still flat, his expression unchanged. We can get the marriage certificate now. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and surreal. Marry this stranger. This man who radiated an aura of cold indifference. It was absurd. A cruel joke. A nightmare unfolding in the harsh light of day. Marry, she echoed, the word a strangled gasp. Is this a bit too fast now? The question tumbled out, laced with disbelief and a growing sense of panic. Internally, a storm raged. Marry. Escape Nan's clutches only to find herself trapped in a different kind of cage. A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. This man, with his expensive suit and his glacial demeanor, what did he want from her? What could she possibly offer him? She was just Lucy, a recent graduate struggling to make ends meet, burdened by family obligations and haunted by a past she couldn't escape. He was different. Untouchable. A world apart. She could practically smell the money on him, the subtle scent of power and privilege that clung to him like a second skin. He was everything she wasn't. And he wanted to marry her. Why? He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. I'm aware this is unconventional. My schedule doesn't allow for protracted courtships. I prefer efficiency. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business merger rather than a life-altering commitment. Lucy's mind raced. Efficiency? Was that all this was to him? A transaction? A way to check off another box on his meticulously planned agenda? The thought stung, a sharp prick of humiliation. She wanted to bolt, to run as far away from this man and his cold, calculating eyes as possible. But something held her back. A desperate hope, perhaps, that this bizarre situation might offer a way out, a chance to break free from the suffocating grip of her current circumstances. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. I just graduated. I'm interning at Foucher Group, he finished for her, his gaze finally softening, a flicker of something akin to recognition in his eyes. I know. The revelation hit Lucy like a physical blow. Foucher Group. He knew. This wasn't just any wealthy stranger. This was her mind blanked, unable to process the enormity of the realization. He was Fu Nanzhou. The enigmatic CEO, a figure shrouded in mystery, a name whispered with reverence and awe in the hushed corridors of the company. The man she'd only seen from afar, a distant, almost mythical figure. And he was sitting across from her, proposing marriage. The absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. He seemed to sense her inner turmoil, a subtle shift in his posture, a slight softening of his expression. I understand this is a lot to take in, he said, his voice losing some of its earlier coldness. But I assure you, this arrangement would be mutually beneficial. The phrase hung in the air, a stark reminder of the transactional nature of his proposal. Mutually beneficial. What did he mean by that? What could she possibly offer a man like him? The questions swirled in her mind, a chaotic vortex of confusion and apprehension. The coffee in front of her had gone cold, a bitter reflection of her own churning emotions. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, to find some semblance of composure in the face of this overwhelming situation. I need time to think, she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, a curt, almost businesslike gesture. Of course. I'll be in touch. He rose to his feet, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over her. He paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on her face, before turning and walking away, disappearing into the bustling crowd outside. Lucy sat there, frozen in place, the echoes of his words ringing in her ears. Marry Fu Nanzhou. The very idea was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. The opulence was suffocating. Lucy had never seen a house like this, not even in movies. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, casting intricate patterns on the polished marble floor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and something else, something subtly masculine and expensive, made her feel acutely aware of the shabbiness of her own clothes. Her heart, already fluttering with a nervous energy born of the whirlwind blind date, began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. Just moments ago, she had been ushered into this grand space by a stern-faced housekeeper, the click of her heels on the marble echoing the hollow beat of uncertainty in Lucy's own chest. She had imagined a modest apartment, a young man close to her own age, a chance however slim at an escape from the suffocating grip of her sister's husband, Che Nan, and his incessant demands for money. The man she'd met earlier, the man who'd proposed within minutes of their meeting, wasn't the nervous, slightly awkward Jiang Yizhou her sister Cece had described. This man, sitting across from her now with an unsettlingly calm demeanor, radiated power. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, a sound that seemed magnified in the heavy silence. His eyes, dark and fathomless, assessed her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He hadn't spoken since the housekeeper left, and Lucy felt the silence stretching, a taut wire threatening to snap. She shifted uncomfortably on the plush sofa, the silk clinging to her cheap dress. What had Cece gotten her into? This, Lucy began, her voice trembling slightly. She cleared her throat, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. This isn't how I imagined it. He raised an eyebrow, a subtle movement that somehow managed to convey both amusement and impatience. Imagined what? The proposal. Jiang Yizhou, the name felt strange on her tongue, like a costume she was trying to wear that didn't fit. He was supposed to be different. A flicker of something confusion, perhaps, crossed his face. Jiang Yizhou. He repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it. He set his glass down on the table, the small click resonating in the silence. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Fu Nanzhou. The words hit Lucy like a physical blow. Fu Nanzhou. The name echoed in her mind, a name she vaguely recognized from the news, from business magazines Cece sometimes read. Fu Nanzhou, CEO of the Fusher Group. A man of immense wealth, of power, of age. He was older than the man she'd expected, much older. The casual elegance he exuded, the lines etched around his eyes, spoke of a life lived, a life she hadn't even begun to comprehend. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the implications of this revelation. Fu Nanzhou. She stammered, the realization dawning slowly, like a sunrise through a thick fog. But, Cece said. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. Your sister said what, exactly? Lucy's mind raced. She thought of Cece's nervous smile, her hurried explanations, the way she'd avoided eye contact. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Had Cece lied? But why? She said it was Jiang Yizhou, Lucy mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. A friend of a friend. Someone closer to my age. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Someone normal. His gaze intensified, boring into her. Lucy felt as though he were peeling back layers of her, exposing her vulnerabilities, her desperation. Normal, he echoed, the word tinged with irony. He paused, then continued, his voice low and steady, Miss Lucy, she whispered. Miss Lucy, he repeated, his voice a caress against the sharp edges of her panic. I believe your sister has made a rather significant error. The understatement of the century, Lucy thought, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. An error? This wasn't a misplaced comma, this was her life. Her escape route, however flimsy it had seemed, had just vanished into thin air. Cece knew that I didn't want to get married, Lucy's voice cracked. The elegant surroundings, the sheer impossibility of the situation pressed down on her, suffocating her. She felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, a humiliating display of weakness she desperately tried to suppress. She knew that it's just that this little girl looks a bit like her, the words tumbled out, disjointed, desperate. Your name is Fu Nanzhou, you are not Jiang Yizhou. She took a shaky breath, clinging to the one thought that offered a sliver of hope. Can you divorce me first? Her phone vibrated in her purse, a jarring interruption to the suffocating tension. It was Yi, her friend, her lifeline. Without waiting for Fu Nanzhou's response, Lucy scrambled for her phone, clutching it like a talisman. Yi, she breathed into the receiver, her voice thick with unshed tears. I'm at his house. It's not Jiang Yizhou. It's Fu Nanzhou. The Fu Nanzhou. The remnants of the shattered vase lay scattered across the pristine marble floor, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Lucy could still feel the tremor in her hand, the echo of the impact reverberating through her bones. She hadn't meant to throw it. It had simply slipped, propelled by a surge of adrenaline and a desperate need to break the suffocating tension that filled Fu Nanzhou's impeccably decorated living room. He stood across from her, an inscrutable mask on his face, his eyes like polished obsidian, reflecting the chaos back at her. He must think I'm insane, she thought, her stomach twisting with a mixture of shame and defiance. But how could I not react? How could I remain composed when my life has just been turned into such a grotesque spectacle? The doorbell rang, a shrill intrusion that sliced through the silence. Lucy flinched, every nerve ending on high alert. A premonition, cold and heavy, settled in her stomach. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, who stood on the other side of that door. Fu Nanzhou's gaze flickered towards the entrance, a subtle shift in his posture that betrayed a similar unease. He moved with a languid grace that belied the tension in the air, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As he opened the door, Lucy held her breath, bracing herself for the inevitable confrontation. Che Nan stood framed in the doorway, his usual smug grin plastered on his face. It was a grin that Lucy had come to loathe, a symbol of his condescending attitude and the suffocating control he exerted over her and Cece. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with false cordiality. Look what we have here. A cozy little reunion. His eyes darted between Lucy and Fu Nanzhou, a predatory gleam in their depths. He's enjoying this, Lucy thought, her fists clenching at her sides. He's reveling in the power he thinks he holds over us. What do you want, Che Nan? Fu Nanzhou's voice was a low rumble, laced with a warning that sent a shiver down Lucy's spine. Even in this moment of vulnerability, he exuded an aura of power, a quiet menace that made Che Nan's bravado seem almost pathetic. Che Nan sauntered into the room, uninvited, his eyes raking over the expensive furnishings with a mixture of envy and disdain. I just came to check on my dear sister-in-law, he said, his gaze settling on Lucy. The words were laced with a sickening sweetness that made her skin crawl. To make sure she's not being taken advantage of. Lucy's breath hitched in her throat. The sheer audacity of his words, the implication that she was somehow complicit in this charade, sent a wave of anger washing over her. She began, but her voice faltered, choked by the rising tide of emotion. He's twisted everything, she thought, her mind racing. He's made me the villain in his sick game. Don't you dare pretend to be concerned about me, she finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. You're the one who set this whole thing up. You're the one who's been using me, manipulating me, treating me like, she trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her resentment, the years of accumulated frustration and anger boiling to the surface. Che Nan chuckled, a low, guttural sound that grated on her nerves. My dear Lucy, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You're being overly dramatic. I was simply trying to help you. A girl like you, with no prospects, no future. This was your chance to escape your dreary existence. To marry a wealthy man, to live a life of luxury. He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a poisonous cloud. You should be thanking me. Thanking you. Lucy's voice rose, sharp and brittle. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be paraded around like some kind of prize? The image of herself standing there, dressed in Gao Ning's clothes, a pawn in their twisted game, flashed through her mind. The humiliation, the sense of betrayal, it was almost unbearable. Help me. The words escaped her lips, a desperate plea for help from the one person who might understand, the one person who might be able to see through Che Nan's lies. She turned towards the doorway, where Cece stood, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Cece's gaze darted between Lucy, Che Nan, and Fu Nanzhou, her mind struggling to process the scene unfolding before her. What is going on here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Che Nan turned toward Cece, his smile fading, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "My dear Cece," he said, his voice laced with a warning. "Don't interfere. This doesn't concern you. You actually want to be my aunt?" Cece stared at Lucy, betrayal etched onto her features. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The blood drained from Lucy's face. Even Cece, her own sister, had been manipulated by Che Nan's insidious lies. "Cece, it's not like that," she pleaded, her voice cracking with despair. "He's lying. He's twisted everything. Do you have any humanity?" Lucy's voice cracked, each word a physical effort. The sheer weight of Che Nan's manipulations, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. Che Nan simply smirked, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Your abacus beads are falling on my face," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He gestured towards Fu Nanzhou. "This man, this prize you've snagged, he's nothing but a fool. A pawn in my game." He turned back to Lucy, his eyes burning with a chilling intensity. "And you, my dear Lucy, you're nothing but a tool. A means to an end." The opulent silence of Fu Nanzhou's house pressed down on Lucy, a stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of her sister's apartment. The air, subtly scented with sandalwood and something else she couldn't quite place, felt thick and heavy, like a velvet curtain drawn between her and the outside world. She perched on the edge of a plush sofa, the fabric cool beneath her fingertips, feeling strangely adrift. Earlier that evening, her life had been a predictable, if unpleasant, routine. Now, it was a tangled mess of hasty agreements and unspoken expectations. She glanced at the man sitting across from her, the architect of this sudden shift. Fu Nanzhou. Even his name sounded like a whispered secret. He was flipping through a document, his brow furrowed in concentration, the sharp lines of his face illuminated by the soft glow of a table lamp. He was a study in controlled stillness, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside her. Lucy wrung her hands, the delicate jade bracelet he'd placed on her wrist earlier a cold, hard reminder of their sham marriage clicking softly. She tried to decipher his expression, searching for a clue, a hint of what this strange man was thinking. Was he regretting this as much as she was? The thought brought a flicker of bitter satisfaction, quickly extinguished by a wave of apprehension. What was she supposed to do now? What were the rules of this bizarre game they were playing? He set the document aside, the movement precise and economical, and finally looked at her. His gaze was intense, unerringly direct. Lucy felt her breath catch in her throat. She began, then faltered, unsure of what she wanted to say. There were 1,000 questions clamoring for attention, but none of them seemed adequate for the strange intimacy of the moment. "You must be tired," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. The words were simple, almost mundane, but they carried a weight that settled deep in Lucy's chest. It was a kindness she hadn't anticipated, a flicker of warmth in the vast, cold expanse of his house. He stood, the movement fluid and graceful, and walked towards a cabinet stocked with crystal decanters. "Something to drink," he offered, without turning around. His back was to her, but Lucy could still feel the weight of his gaze, a palpable presence in the quiet room. "Water, please," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched as he poured a glass, the crystal catching the light, throwing fractured rainbows across the polished surface of the cabinet. Each clink and splash seemed amplified in the silence. He handed her the glass, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, fleeting, but it sent a jolt of unexpected awareness through her. Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the swirling water in the glass, trying to regain her composure. He sat down again, the sofa dipping slightly under his weight. "I understand this must be unexpected," he said, the words carefully chosen, as if he were treading on thin ice. Lucy nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Unexpected was an understatement. Her life had been upended, flipped on its head, and she was still struggling to grasp the new reality. A long silence stretched between them, filled only with the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Lucy could hear the frantic rhythm of her own pulse, a counterpoint to the slow, steady beat of the clock. She felt a strange mix of fear and something else. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or a grudging admiration for the man who had orchestrated this entire charade. "I won't eat you," he said suddenly, a hint of amusement in his voice. The words, so unexpected, so absurd in the context of their situation, startled a laugh from her. Lucy looked up, meeting his gaze at last. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cool, detached mask he usually wore. But she'd seen it, a glimpse of the man beneath the facade. "No," she stammered, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly, the air less heavy, the silence less oppressive. "I'm not a pervert," he added, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Lucy couldn't help but smile back. "I didn't think you were," she said, the word surprisingly easy to say. He leaned back against the sofa, his posture relaxing for the first time since she'd arrived. "This is your home now," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are the mistress of this house." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. Mistress of this house. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She was still a pawn in his game, a stand-in for someone else, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of agency, a sense of control over her own destiny. She was no longer simply a victim of circumstance. She was a player, however unwilling, in this complex, high-stakes game. And she was determined to play it well. She took a deep breath, the cool water calming her nerves. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, her gaze meeting his. The night stretched before them, long and uncertain, but for the first time since this whirlwind began, Lucy felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could navigate this strange new world. The cool, impersonal glass of Fu Nanzhou's office seemed to amplify the silence. He stared out at the sprawling cityscape, each glittering skyscraper a testament to ambition and power, much like his own. His thoughts, however, were not on the empire he'd built, but on the flicker of defiance he'd seen in Lucy's eyes. That spark, so unexpected, so intriguing. He'd initially dismissed her as another pawn in Gao Ning's game, a convenient stand-in, a face he barely registered. But the quiet strength she'd displayed, the way she'd held her ground against Che Nan's blustering, it had chipped away at his preconceived notions. "Go check Lucy's family background for me," he instructed Secretary Lin, his voice low and even, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. He needed to understand. He needed to know what molded that steel beneath the fragile exterior. The air in Cece's apartment was thick with the stale scent of instant noodles and despair. Lucy sat on the edge of the worn sofa, the floral pattern faded like a forgotten memory. The events of the past few days felt like a fever dream: the proposal, the revelation, the confrontation. Nan's oily smile, once a source of unease, now curdled her stomach. He paced like a caged animal, his bravado cracking under the weight of Fu Nanzhou's silent power. "I can get the president fired," he'd snarled, his words echoing the hollow threat of a cornered rat. Lucy had watched him, a strange calm settling over her. Fear still flickered within her, a cold hand squeezing her heart, but something else was there too, a nascent strength she hadn't known she possessed. It was the strength of desperation, the strength of having nothing left to lose. The police station was a stark contrast to the sterile elegance of Fu Nanzhou's office and the suffocating claustrophobia of Cece's apartment. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long, unforgiving shadows, highlighting the cracks in the linoleum floor. Nan's bluster had completely evaporated, replaced by a whimpering plea for leniency. Lucy watched him, a detached observer in this surreal drama. Cece, beside her, trembled with a mixture of fear and relief. The police officer, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, listened patiently, her gaze occasionally flicking towards Lucy, a silent acknowledgement of her quiet strength. Lucy hadn't realized until this moment how much she'd internalized, how much she'd absorbed and processed without outward display. It was almost as if she'd been preparing herself, unknowingly, for this very moment. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Fu Nanzhou's investigation revealed the depth of Nan's depravity: the gambling debts, the harassment, the carefully orchestrated blackmail scheme. He'd used Lucy, used them all, like puppets in his twisted game. A wave of icy anger washed over Fu Nanzhou. He hadn't felt this protective instinct in years. "The little lady is really pitiful," he murmured to himself, the words catching him by surprise. He'd always prided himself on his detachment, his emotional control. But something about Lucy's vulnerability, coupled with her unexpected resilience, stirred something deep within him. The news of Nan's arrest spread through the Fusher group like wildfire. Whispers followed Lucy down the hallways, curious glances followed her every move. She'd become an enigma, the quiet girl who'd brought down a predator, the unwitting pawn who'd become a queen. And then came the promotion. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a public declaration, but a quiet acknowledgement of her competence. A new role, a new challenge, a chance to rebuild her life, away from the shadow of Nan's toxicity. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been thrust into this world, this corporate labyrinth, through a cruel deception, yet here she was, finding her footing, carving out a space for herself. Fu Nanzhou watched her from afar, observing her quiet determination, the way she navigated the complexities of her new role with an unexpected grace. He found himself drawn to her, to the quiet strength that radiated from within. He'd built his empire on calculated risks, on strategic moves, but Lucy, she was a variable he hadn't accounted for. He'd thought he understood the game, the players, the stakes. But Lucy was rewriting the rules, shifting the balance of power, and he found himself captivated by the unfolding narrative. One evening, amidst the opulent chaos of a company gala, their paths crossed. He stood amidst a throng of admirers, the epitome of power and success, yet his gaze kept drifting towards her, a solitary figure standing near the edge of the ballroom, her quiet elegance a stark contrast to the ostentatious displays of wealth surrounding her. He excused himself from the sycophants and made his way towards her, the noise of the party fading into a muted hum as he approached. "You seem different," he remarked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and defiance. "Different how?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper above the music. He hesitated, searching for the right words. Stronger, he finally said, the word hanging in the air between them. More yourself. A faint smile touched her lips. Perhaps, she replied, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Perhaps I'm finally figuring out who myself is. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw not a victim, not a pawn, but a survivor. A woman forging her own path, rewriting her own narrative. And in that moment, he realized that he wasn't just intrigued, he was captivated. Later that week, a situation arose, a minor crisis involving a disgruntled employee attempting to extort money from the company using Lucy's name, claiming some fabricated connection to her. Fu Nanzhou's response was swift and decisive, his fury cold and controlled. Using my wife's name to defraud money, he stated, his voice laced with steel. The words echoed through the room, a clear message to anyone who dared to underestimate him, or her. The words, however, resonated differently with Lucy. My wife. He hadn't corrected the man. He'd used the term deliberately, possessively. It was a claim, a declaration, a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. And in the silence that followed, Lucy felt a tremor run through her, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the unsettling realization that the lines between pretense and reality were blurring, and she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to draw them back. The opulent silence of the Fu house pressed in on Lucy. Sunlight, fractured by the prism of a crystal chandelier, scattered across the Persian rug, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. She traced the intricate patterns with her gaze, her mind a whirlwind of confused emotions. The revelation that Fu Nanzhou, the man she had impulsively married, was the CEO of the Fusher Group, the man whose name resonated with power and prestige, left her reeling. It wasn't just the sheer scale of his wealth, it was the realization that he had chosen her, a woman entangled in a web of petty family drama, a woman he barely knew. This is a lot to take in, she murmured, more to herself than to the silent figure across the room. Fu Nanzhou, his expression unreadable, watched her from the leather armchair, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. The sharp angles of his face, softened by the warm light, seemed to hold a depth she hadn't noticed before. Had he been observing her all this time, gauging her reaction, assessing her worth? A shiver traced its path down her spine. He rose, the movement fluid and graceful, and crossed the room towards her. His proximity sent a strange current through her, a mix of apprehension and something else. Something akin to understanding. It is, he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the air. But you needn't be afraid. Afraid? Was that what she was? Lucy searched her heart. Fear was certainly there, a constant companion since Che Nan, her brother-in-law, had begun his insidious campaign of manipulation. But there was also a nascent sense of defiance, a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected turn of events could be her escape. I'm not afraid, she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. He paused, his gaze intense, as if searching for the truth behind her words. Then, a subtle shift in his expression, a softening of his eyes that hinted at something akin to amusement. Good, he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Because I intend to make you an offer. His words, cryptic yet charged with an underlying intensity, sent another wave of uncertainty washing over her. What offer could a man like Fu Nanzhou possibly make to someone like her? Her mind raced, conjuring up scenarios, each more improbable than the last. Days blurred into a kaleidoscope of revelations and confrontations. The truth about Gao Ning, her carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbling under the weight of her own machinations, brought a grim satisfaction. The realization that she had been a pawn in Gao Ning's desperate attempt to regain Fu Nanzhou's attention left a bitter taste in Lucy's mouth. Yet, a strange sense of liberation accompanied the anger. She had been used, manipulated, but she was no longer blind. The confrontation with Che Nan was a tempest of suppressed rage finally unleashed. Cece, her sister, initially hesitant, found her voice in the storm, her fear giving way to a fierce protectiveness of Lucy. Seeing her sister finally stand up to her abusive husband, a surge of pride washed over Lucy, momentarily eclipsing the anxiety gnawing at her. "It ends now, Che Nan," Cece's voice, trembling but resolute, echoed in the tense atmosphere. The look in her eyes, a mixture of fear and determination, mirrored Lucy's own internal struggle. They had been trapped for so long, suffocated by the weight of his manipulative control. But the suffocating grip had loosened, and a breath of fresh air, intoxicating in its freedom, filled their lungs. In the aftermath, amidst the wreckage of shattered illusions and broken relationships, Lucy found herself drawn to Fu Nanzhou's quiet strength. His actions, more than his words, spoke volumes. He had orchestrated the downfall of Gao Ning, not out of revenge, but to protect her. He had offered her not a gilded cage, but a sanctuary, a place to heal and rebuild. "I married you for reasons that are no longer relevant," he admitted one evening, his voice low, almost hesitant, as they sat on the veranda overlooking the sprawling gardens of the Fu estate. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking backdrop to his confession. "But," he continued, his gaze meeting hers, "I am not displeased with the outcome." Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. His words, carefully chosen, devoid of flowery pronouncements, held a weight that resonated deep within her soul. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, but his actions, his quiet protectiveness, spoke louder than any declaration of love. "Nature will be good to you," he said later, his voice a soft murmur against her hair as he held her close. The scent of sandalwood and something uniquely his enveloped her, a comforting warmth spreading through her chilled limbs. "You are my wife." Each word, simple yet profound, chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. "You are the mistress of this house," he added, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. The gesture, intimate and possessive, sent a shiver down her spine. And then, the words that finally pierced the veil of uncertainty, the words that echoed the unspoken feelings blossoming within her own heart, "I only love you." The declaration, raw and vulnerable, hung in the air, a testament to the unexpected connection forged in the crucible of deceit and manipulation. Lucy closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, a wave of warmth chasing away the lingering chill of fear. In that moment, surrounded by the opulent silence of the Fu house, she knew she was finally home. Not in the grand estate, but in the arms of the man who had chosen her, flaws and all. He had seen past the facade, past the fear, and had found something worth cherishing. And in his embrace, she found the strength to face whatever the future held, together. The crisp, starched fabric of her new blazer felt unfamiliar against Lucy's skin. She smoothed the hand over it, the faint scent of dry cleaning fluid mixing with the nervous flutter in her stomach. Team Leader Lu. It still felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she'd been trapped, suffocated by Che Nan's constant demands and Cece's anxious silence. Now, here she was, stepping into a freshly painted office, a team of expectant faces turning towards her. A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her confidence. Could she really do this? Let a team? But then, the memory of Fu Nanzhou's steady gaze, the quiet strength in his words, "You are capable of more than you know," warmed the chill. She straightened her spine, a small, determined smile playing on her lips. The celebratory dinner that evening was a muted affair. Cece, though relieved at Che Nan's arrest, still wore a shadow of guilt, a residue of years spent shrinking under his thumb. "Congratulations, Team Leader Lu," she murmured, raising her glass of orange juice. Lucy caught the flicker of genuine pride in her sister's eyes, a fragile blossom pushing through the weeds of fear. It was enough. More than enough. My wife will have to work hard in the future, Fu Nanzhou said, his deep voice drawing Lucy's attention. He was watching her, an unreadable expression in his dark eyes. His words were light, teasing, but Lucy sensed a current of something deeper beneath them. Respect? Perhaps even admiration. The thought sent a blush creeping up her neck. Later, as they drove back to their temporary apartment, a surprisingly cozy space Fu Nanzhou had secured after the incident, Lucy felt a shift in the atmosphere between them. The tension that had crackled since their whirlwind marriage had dissipated, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. "It's nice," she said softly, gazing out at the city lights blurring past. "Be in Gus." He glanced at her, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "Us?" Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. "I mean not pretending," she stammered, her cheeks burning. "Not being pawns in someone else's game." The car pulled up outside their building. He turned to her, his gaze intense. "We are not pawns, Lucy," he said quietly. "We never were." His hand brushed against hers, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. It was a simple gesture, yet it held a weight of unspoken promise. A promise of a future, together. A future Lucy had never dared to imagine. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new beginnings. Lucy threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth. The team, initially hesitant, soon warmed to her quiet competence and unwavering fairness. Even the news of Gao Ning's downfall, her manipulative schemes exposed, her reputation tarnished, barely registered on Lucy's radar. It was a distant echo of a past life, a life she had finally left behind. One evening, as Lucy and Fu Nanzhou sat on their small balcony, the city light spread out beneath them like a glittering tapestry, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "My grandfather's not well." Lucy's heart clenched. She had met Fu Nanzhou's grandfather only once, a frail, dignified man with eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom and sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Nanzhou," she whispered, placing her hand on his. He turned to her, his gaze searching. She wants to see us married. Properly." A warmth spread through Lucy's chest. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, not the kind you read about in novels. But in the quiet intensity of his voice, in the vulnerability he allowed himself to show, she heard something far more profound. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the hospital chapel. Fu Nanzhou's grandfather, frail but alert, watched with a gentle smile as they exchanged vows. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet sanctity of the chapel, Lucy felt a sense of peace she had never known before. It wasn't just the escape from the suffocating grip of her past, but the quiet certainty that she had found her place, her person. A few days later, Lucy woke with a strange fluttering in her stomach. It wasn't nerves, not the kind she'd grown accustomed to. It was something else. Something lighter. Almost joyful. A sudden, inexplicable urge overwhelmed her. She rushed to the nearest pharmacy, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When she returned to the apartment, clutching the small white stick, Fu Nanzhou was waiting, his expression a mixture of concern and anticipation. He took one look at her face, at the trembling hand holding the pregnancy test, and his breath hitched. "So," he began, his voice barely a whisper. Lucy simply nodded, tears welling in her eyes. A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, transforming his usually reserved features. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a strength that made her feel safe, protected. "So this is a double happiness," he murmured against her hair. "My grandfather and now this." He paused, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "It should be 3 happy events," he added, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather's health, our child, and," he looked into her eyes, his gaze deep and unwavering. "And us." Truly us. The city lights twinkled outside, a silent witness to the quiet miracle unfolding within the small apartment. The air thrummed with unspoken promises, with the weight of a love born from chaos, forged in adversity, and destined for something extraordinary. The future, once a blurry, uncertain canvas, now held a vibrant tapestry of hope, woven with the threads of their newfound family, their shared dreams, and the quiet, enduring strength of their love.